What is going on, YouTube? This is Acid Roots. So I'm going to review the debut album by Sugar Ray. Basically, this project is called Lemonade and Brownies, and it came out in the spring of 1995. So the thing about this particular album is just the fact that it's different from their 1997 album, Floored. But I have to say about this particular album, just had a good amalgamation of type. This album just had a good amalgamation of type things that just particularly happened between like the mid-late 90s and stuff like that. There were folks like Deftones, Limp Bizkit, Kid Rock, some of those type folks that seemed to take influence from this particular project, or at least had something in common with this particular type of stuff. There's also a little bit of Rage Against the Machine and White Zombie on here. So it's just some particular there's just some particular popular 90s metal that was affluent about this particular project. And it's just an interesting type one just because it's very different from Floored from 1997 and especially different from 1459 from 1999. So this is far removed from like Sugar Ray's kind of more pop rock type. This is far removed from Sugar Ray's more pop rock type appeal that they had in the mid late 90s as far as that pitch kind of particularly having with it. But I would have to say this is still a pretty good project here. I would definitely say this is a revolutionary album. I would definitely have to give this album credit for as far as that particular pitch kind of happens. It just kicked off like a lot of sounds that particularly kind of happened. To my knowledge, this is one of the earliest kind of new metal albums apart from like Chaos AD by Sepultura as far as that pitch kind of particularly happened. But that came out in 1993. But still, this was relatively on the heels of that particular type of stuff. This is definitely, like I was saying, a pretty revolutionary type album here. Did a lot of damage. Just was pretty big particular type project. The only real thing that this album particularly lacks is just like a huge kind of single to kind of get it like some chart appeal. That's kind of the thing about new metal when it wasn't stuff like Limp Bizkit and Korn and some of those type folks. They didn't really have like as many just full blown type smashes. I mean, it was of course gigantically popular 97 4, but I have to say this is still relatively early to kind of see that particular sound kind of blossom as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. It's just interesting kind of get some of this stuff because I do feel like this album was kind of a big deal. This is definitely one that helped kickstart some things. Definitely one of the seminal type ones in new metal. When you look for particular new metal albums that really kicked off a genre, I'd say apart from like maybe I don't know if Full Blown Sublime was one of those type ones, but I would definitely say Chaos AD by Sepultura is definitely one of those, along with Roots from 1996 by Sepultura. I'd say this album's a pretty big deal in that particular category. A little bit of Floored from 1997. Of course, Limp Bizkit's $3 Bill, y'all, some of those type ones. But this is definitely like pretty quality album here, I'd have to say. Despite the fact that it's not like that much of a commercial smash, I still would have to say I'm going to give it a relatively high score. I'd have to say it's a pretty good concept, get that in particular. Had a lot of good stuff on here, a lot of good affability, and this is just a pretty basic and vanilla type album, I'd have to suppose. I mean, there's some like critics kind of felt like this wasn't the most distinct type project, but I definitely feel like this is the sort of stuff that you could hear just in a movie soundtrack, something like that. Just the sort of pitch that would have been ripped out of 1995, 1996, something like that. Just like Rumble in the Bronx, some of those type movies, just a typical kind of hangout type tune, just for like the heroes, the kickback kind of happens, just some of those type things. This would have supposed to some good affable type vibes kind of get from that in particular. But this album did have 3 singles, pretty good concept. Get that in particular. We'll go ahead and talk about some of these. But yeah, this is just some new metal type hit that just has a lot of affability about it and just particularly revolutionary. But this was kind of, I don't want to say it's not an underwhelming album. It's just underwhelming in terms of the popularity that it had because particularly this album almost got them. This album particularly flopped on the label as far as that pitch kind of happened with it, but it was still a pretty big deal just with the fact of the damage that it had done and the revolutionary ways that it had caused and just the revolutionary ways that it had caused as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. We'll go ahead and talk about the singles here. So basically the first single is Mean Machine. This is a pretty highlighted one, I'd have to say. Mean Machine's a pretty good debut single from Sugar Ray as far as that pitch kind of particularly happens with it. This is a very White Zombie-esque. Mean Machine is a very White Zombie-esque kind of noise rumbler. I'd have to say pretty good concept for that one in particular. This is like a great hangout tune, I would have to say, and this is definitely some PlayStation music and just a rock out kind of cut. I'd have to say it's pretty dope concept. Get this one in particular. I'd have to suppose this is just basically this one just feels real ripped out of 1995, 1996. Just a typical kind of hangout type tune, just kind of get within that standard fare, just like ripped out of like the mid late 90s, especially just typical kind of rap metal as far as that pitch can happens. Just relatively good metal, just within that sense. If you're looking for something like rather stellar metal just within that sense. If you're looking for something like White Zombie that's just as popular as them just within the pitch of like 1995, 1996, just the mid 90s type fare, I'd have to say this is a pretty good concept of one to get in particular. This is a very vanilla song. I just feel like the particular concept, this really just feels like something that White Zombie would have done, like when you think of songs that they did, I can't really remember the White Zombie songs right now, but just something like More Human Than Human, something like that, just without the electro kind of club hopping of it, but just the typical kind of White Zombie metal type tune. I'd have to suppose something like not so much Astro Creep 2000, but the one from 1992, that particular album, just some of those type boilers and bangers as far as that pitch kind of has with it. Just something ripped out of 93, 94, 95, something of that particular pitch. Just a good kind of White Zombie-esque type tune. I'd have to say just some good rumblers and a great vanilla hangout type tune to kind of get in particular. There's some great play. There's definitely some great PlayStation type music. Pretty good single, but it's just not that distinct. I'd have to say that's the only real problem with this. This is pretty vanilla and basic. I just would have to suppose within that concept, it's a good song. It's just kind of the fact that compared to songs like Fly and some of the ones like Someday and Every Morning, some of those type pitches. I mean, this is just kind of like an underground kind of Sugar Ray type tune compared to the stuff that they would do in their biggest heyday years as far as that pitch kind of happens. But it's just kind of, if you're looking for early kind of Sugar Ray type hits, this is a good one to go with. This is the most popular song according to Spotify, I suppose. And it's a pretty good song. It's just kind of the concept that's just kind of a little bit basic, I would have to suppose, but still a nice one. 10 Seconds Down is the second single. This is another highlighted one. This is like an early new metal type smash, I would have to say. This is pretty similar to Limp Bizkit's type stuff, I would have to say. Has pretty similar to Limp Bizkit cadence, I would definitely suppose. Just Mark McGrath really sounds similar to Fred Durst on this particular song. This is a good gnarled kind of party song. The song just has some good gnarled kind of party riffage on this particular one as far as that pitch kind of has with it. So it's just some good concepts. This definitely reminds me of a new metal type smash from like the earliest heydays. It's definitely one of the earlier type ones to kind of get within that particular format before Limp Bizkit was putting out songs like Break Stuff and some of those type pitches. Very similar to Break Stuff, some of those type ones. There's some other ones off of like Significant Other from 1999 that I'm not really thinking of. Maybe a couple ones from like $3 Bill, y'all. I can't really remember full blown right now, but just some of those ones like Break Stuff, some of those type ones, a little bit of Nookie just within that relative type pitch. Some of those particular type ones, I'd have to say, very similar to Limp Bizkit on this particular song. I definitely almost would think that Limp Bizkit probably took some similarities from this particular song. 10 Seconds Down is definitely an early bird kind of new metal highlight, I'd have to say. Definitely one of the earliest hits within that genre. Iron Mike is the third single. This is a pretty highlighted one also. This one's a little bit lazier, I'd have to say, but still pretty highlighted one. This is like a hazy kind of Rage Against the Machine like evening kickback of a song, I'd have to say. This is a basic new metal cut, I'd have to say, and this is just an easy kind of summer stretcher. So this one just has a little bit lazier energy, not quite as Iron Mike is not quite as much of a turn up type song compared to 10 Seconds Down and Mean Machine, but still pretty nice summer stretcher to kind of get just within that relative sense. Just would have to say just some hazy kind of ambience, just the relative kickback of just sipping lemonade, some of those type pitches, just smoking a stogie, something like that, smoking a swish or something of that particular pitch as far as that format kind of has, just having some barbecue, some stuff like that, just kicking back in like the summer skies, the orange skies, some stuff like that as far as that pitch kind of goes. It's a real nice one, just basic kind of vanilla type bop to kind of get just typical kind of stuff that like folks like Alien Ant Farm and some of those folks would do, kind of just malaise, some of that stuff, Trapped, and some of those type folks, just later new metal type bands, especially from like the early 2000s. I have to say, it's just a pretty nice one. It's almost kind of post grunge esque, but it just kind of has like a little bit more of malaise towards it. It's just kind of like a great song to listen to, like 4:30, 5:30 p.m. is like the sun setting, stuff like that, just within that pitch. It's really not like a revved up type song, but still a pretty nice one to kind of get for some relative kind of Rage Against the Machine like new metal, I'd have to say. So it's a dope enough concept. So basically there's 14 songs on this particular album, and minus like the intro, which is not a song, and then like there's a skit song on here, like a comedy skit song, which is basically Drive By. That would narrow this album down to 12 songs. So I'm not going to count One Brave Cowboy either, because that's not much of a song, but I just would have to say, so out of the 12 songs on this particular album, I wound up recommending to 8. So that's about 2/3 of this particular album, I'd have to say. That's 2/3 of this particular album, I'd have to say. It's a pretty good concept to get that one in particular, I'd have to say. So we'll go ahead and recommend these 8 songs here so you can see what I'm talking about. So basically the 8 songs would be Mean Machine, 10 Seconds Down, The Greatest, Dance Party USA, Streaker, Rhyme Stealer, Caboose, and Iron Mike. So to talk about some of these, like a real nice highlighted one on here would be Dance Party USA. Just like the song title implies, this is a pretty good dance party type bop to kind of get in particular. Just a real nice highlighted one. Just definitely one of the more immediate ones to kind of go for. I'd have to say, this kind of a basic new metal bop, I'd have to suppose. It's a good concept for that. This is like a good city out and about type noise of a song, I'd have to say, definitely. This is like some vintage kind of 90s Cali metal, I would have to feel like. And this is just a basic hangout gem, I would have to say, in like an outdoor sense, I'd have to suppose. So it's a pretty dope concept to get that one in particular. This is definitely a pretty gnarled type one. Just has some good concepts on here, just in particular. Just works pretty well. This kind of the riffage on here is not like the most immediate compared to songs like Streaker or compared to songs like 10 Seconds Down, some of those type ones. But I would have to say it's probably one of the more revved up kind of ones, just in particular, just kind of get for like a good hangout session. There are some good hangout type tunes on here. I do feel like I do feel like some of these are just like your basic vanilla type bops as far as that pitch kind of happens with it, but it's just a nice one. So Streaker is definitely one of the best songs on this particular album. I'd say definitely enjoyed this one quite a bit. It's like a gnarled kind of evening outing fun of a song. I would have to say definitely. And it's like the turn up factor. The turn up factor on this song is revved real high, I would have to say, and this is one of the album's best, especially in the riffage, I'd have to say. So it's a dope enough concept. This is definitely a pretty damn highlighted one, I'd have to say. Just a real excellent type one to kind of get. They say this is the last song you hear on the album. This is definitely one of the best ones. So I would definitely immediately go for this one in terms of like some of the typical kind of riffage, just in like classic kind of Sugar Ray as far as that pitch. If you're looking for more underground type Sugar Ray, this is definitely one of the highlights to go for. This is probably one of the best songs just to kind of get in terms of like the vintage kind of retro Sugar Ray. I'd have to say it's not commercial, so it's a pretty nice one. Definitely good riffage on there. Rhyme Stealer is a pretty highlighted one. Definitely enjoyed this one. This one feels ripped out of a basic 90s action movie. I'd have to say just typical kind of fanfare for that sort of stuff. This is just a vanilla kind of hangout gem, I would have to say, and this is just some typical kind of social fun, I would have to say. So pretty good concept for that. Really feels ripped out of 1995, 1996, this 90s metal stuff like that, just within that relative pitch. Just a real vanilla type song and riffage, I'd have to suppose. Really like this one. It's just a good concept. Get this in particular. It's really state of the art type stuff. Just really some strong type stuff to kind of get for like 90s metal as far as that pitch kind of has with it. Just some good stuff overall to kind of have with some of these type of songs. I mean, they may be basic and vanilla, but they're just good. It's just kind of the concept. This is one of the stock kind of ones, and this is one of the highlights. Like when you think of the 90s, you think of like Metallica, you think of Foo Fighters, you think of some of those type ones. But I would say definitely in terms of like 90s metal, ripped out of 95, 96, this is a pretty good vanilla type one to kind of get on here. Just a real good kind of basic type one. So that's a nice one. The Greatest is a pretty good highlight. I'd have to say this is like a brooding kind of rousing metal of a song similar to like Deftones. I would definitely feel like definite good concept for that in particular. This is just a nice summer blaze of a song, I'd have to say, and this is just a hot day kind of lazy kickback cut, I'd have to say. So it's a pretty dope concept. If you like the stuff that Deftones was kind of doing on like White Pony and some of those particular type records, I would definitely have to say this is a good enough concept to get some of that, just some brooding type metal that just has some good similarities to that. So it's definitely some great concepts going to get this in particular. Kind of forgotten about Deftones in recent times. I need to get back to them at some particular point. I think I've reviewed a good chunk of their stuff, but it's just some early type concepts that they were doing like 95, 97, some of those type pitches when Deftones was kind of more new metal-esque. I'd have to suppose dope enough concept to get that in particular. But this is just a real brooding type one. This really works pretty well within that sense. Definitely some good concepts for that. And then Caboose is a pretty good cut. Definitely enjoyed this one. This is like a basic kind of summer ride out heater, I would have to say, definitely. And this reminds me of Kid Rock energy, I would definitely have to suppose. And this is just a good out and about kind of hot weather times of a song, I'd have to say. So this one should definitely remind you of like Kid Rock energy from Devil Without a Cause days and just stuff like that. Just early this early 2000s, late 90s, just that particular pitch, some of those type pitches, just Ba with the Ba type energy, just some of those type ones, Kid Rock and like his rap rock type stuff. Also reminds me of AC/DC, just some of that typical kind of just summer weather, just backyard porch type music, just sipping lemonade, some of those type tunes, lemonade and barbecue, some of that type of stuff, just within a relative pitch of just having some summer kickback and that sort of assortments, I'd have to suppose. So it's dope enough to kind of get some of those. I feel like Caboose has a pretty basic kind of riff on here. This is just a basic kind of vanilla type one. Once again, pretty similar to Rhyme Stealer, some of those type ones, The Greatest, some of those type ones in particular, and like Iron Mike, to some of those type pitch, just some basic riffage like Rhyme Stealer and Mean Machine as far as that pitch kind of particularly happens with it, but it's just some good enough concepts to get this in particular. It's just a good vanilla type rock heater, just in like rap metal as far as that pitch kind of happens with this. So some good concepts. So yeah, so that's the basic concept of the songs I recommend on here. So talk about the 4 songs I didn't recommend on here, which would just be a couple of these. Like Hold Your Eyes was kind of one that just had a poor instrumental and just stuff like that. That was just not a very attractive one. Some of these type ones that I don't recommend are just ones that don't really fit like the metal type fold, or just kind of some more different genres of type stuff that just didn't work that well. We're not really Most of these were not really metal type songs. They were just kind of funk metal or something like that, just trying to do like almost R&B type stuff, or just something with the like, or just something with like a more pop rock type tone, just something that like Red Hot Chili Peppers, some of those type folks would have done, but just did a poor rendition of pulling it off. Hold Your Eyes is an example of just an experimental type song that didn't work that well. Same thing with Danzig Needs a Hug. That was a pretty poor one. Scuzz Boots was kind of an R&B type song. I would almost like this one. This one had potential to be good, but it just didn't pull it off as well as it needed to. And then Big Black Woman was just kind of some poor riffage on that particular song. I was expecting more from that particular type song. I would have figured that the riffage on Big Black Woman would have been a lot better just within the pitch of what it was trying to do, but it just didn't pull it off that particularly well as far as that kind of particularly happened with it. It was just not a good enough example of just doing like a skit type song or just kind of like a get you revved up type song. But just, I mean, the guitar work on here was pretty damn good, but it just didn't really have like the affability that it probably needed to. I think it probably should have had like some riffage and just overall design like Streaker or one of those type ones, or 10 Seconds Down, something like that, or Mean Machine. Just, I know that they have the riffs on this particular album. The guitarist on Sugar Ray is pretty damn good with this particular pitch, but this was not a good example. That was just not a good example of that with Big Black Woman, I'd have to suppose. So that's the concept about it. So me basically recommending 8 songs out of 12 on this particular album, not counting the intro song and then the skit song Drive By. I have to say, I'm going to go ahead and give this album like an 8.5 out of 10. It's just pretty damn good. 2/3 of the particular album, really only 4 songs. If I had liked just one more song, something like that, I probably would have given it like a 9, something like that, 9.5, something within that relative pitch. Pretty close. If it had been 10 out of 12, I probably would have given it a 10 out of 10. So it was really close to getting like a pretty classic score. I'd have to say it's good enough to be able to say that this is definitely worthwhile. It's really needed a hit single that was just like a commercial smash, but they did get to that later. This is their first album, so it's not that big of a deal. They were just kind of testing the waters, stuff like that, just being able to get that particular pitch and just be able to do it. I just would have to say they got to that later with songs like Fly and some of those type pitches off of Ford from 1997. So it's just kind of the concept of getting that in particular. So in terms of the social score, I'm going to go ahead and give the social score like a 7 out of 10. I kind of feel like there's some good stuff on here. This is like a very vanilla type album, has some social affability about it. This album has some social affability about it. I would definitely have to say it's a pretty great hangout album. In particular, it has, I suppose, a number of vanilla. This album has a number of vanilla riffs on here that just make for some basic kind of hangout smashes as far as that pitch kind of particularly happens with it. Just a great album to kind of kick back with your pals and stuff like that. Just some great concepts for PlayStation music, snackage, and stuff like that. Smokage, even just some good summary type kickback type music, and just overall gnarled kind of headbanging type music, and just overall fun times as far as that pitch kind of happens. It just doesn't have like a standoff kind. This album just doesn't have like a standout kind of single just within that pitch of like a breadwinner. Just within that pitch of like a breadwinner, I'd have to suppose. I mean, Mean Machine is pretty good, but it's just so underground. I just question how many full blown people would even know that that single was released to radio and stuff as far as that pitch can happen. So it's good enough. 7 social, I'd have to say. I mean, it's quality on here. There's 2/3 of this particular album is 2/3 of this particular album is chock full of like hangout type hits. I would have to suppose definitely for some good summer energy. I'd have to suppose it just doesn't have that commercial smash. I'd have to suppose. But 7 social. In terms of the future, like Sugar Ray has not put out an album since 2019. Basically, their heyday was like almost 30 years ago. So this came out in 1995, 29 years ago. I'd have to suppose. They've dropped a number of albums. I got a few more of these I'm going to get to. I am going to eventually review their 2003 album and their subsequent ones that had, and then their subsequent ones I'd have to suppose. But this is a pretty highlighted one here. I do definitely recommend this. This is a revolutionary new metal album here. I'd have to say, and definitely pretty blisteringly good. I'd have to say for the most part, just lacked a large smash hit single, but apart from that, this is some damn well quality that I do recommend quite a bit.